welcome everyone. We are back on Dharma podcast with none other than Sandeep Balakrishna. A quick recap of what we discussed with Sandeep in the last episode. Sandeep spoke about the advent of Gandhi back into the country in India from South Africa, and he approached Gopal Krishna Gokhale. And Gokhale found certain skills in him and his capacity to work hard that can be groomed further. And therefore, he recommended the servants of India's society to recruit him and groom him further. Unfortunately, the society found Gandhi to be a misfit and denied him admission into their fold. That is when Gandhi decided to move to Sabarmati and set up a shop, which later on famously became known as the Sabarmati Ashram. And that is what Sandeep chronicled with his impeccable research. So now we shall resume that conversation with Sandeep and take the journey of Mahatma Gandhi and therefore the evolution of Congress Party, because both of them are interlinked in this episode. Hello Sandeep, it's good to be back again on Dharma podcast with you. So Sandeep, you revealed a lot of facets about Gandhi, his personality and his advent into India, which was erudite to say the least. So let's continue the conversation from where we left in the last episode. So once he reached a stage where he set up shop in Sabarmati to propagate what later came to be known as Satyagraha, how did his journey and therefore the Congress journey evolve from there on?
Yeah, thanks Parag, and hearty welcome once again to all our listeners of the Dharma podcast YouTube channel. Now the decision on the part of Gandhi to set up his own shop at Sabarmati, in a sense, in hindsight, and this is also corroborated by several scholars and avid Gandhi researchers, in hindsight they say that, setting up an ashram at Sabarmati was part of Gandhi's long-term strategy to bring the whole of the freedom movement under his whole and soul control. So as we will reveal in the future episodes of this series on the history of the Congress Party, we will show how, real facts and incidents of that period, how they corroborate, this intent, long-term plan of Gandhi to bring the whole freedom movement under his control. So with that out of the way, and then I'll have to quickly address one point which a lot of people in the comments have pointed out. Most of them have requested for a list of books to read. So I want to clarify that I will put out a picture or a list of books containing a list of reference material and in the final episode of this series on the history of the Congress Party.
Thank you.
So now with that out of the way, let's continue Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's journey after he set up his shop at Sabarmati. One of the first the main objective of establishing the ashram at Sabarmati was to acquaint and teach the people of India both the theory, the method and the practice of what he called Satyagraha. So like I mentioned in the previous episode, he set up this shop in 1915. And the first opportunity for carrying out Satyagraha in practice came to Gandhi in 1917. That is just after 2 years after he had established the ashram. So that 1917 was when India's Viceroy, Chelmsford, he refused permission to the great stalwart Mahamana Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya. Madan Mohan Malviya ji wanted to introduce a bill for the immediate abolition of the indenture system. Among other things, the British pretty much oppressed us at every single level. Economics, culture, education, of course, political repression, military, atrocities, all well known. So there was no area of the Indian national life that the British did not touch and destroy. So one of this was something called the indenture system, which is a polite, it was legal. Of course, what the British couldn't do by force, they would do it by passing a law. So one such law was the indentured labor system, which was a legislation, like I said, which is a polite word for slavery. So Indian laborers would be forcibly, employed, and they would be carried off to various vast British plantations throughout the world. So if you see a large Indian population in Suriname, in Trinidad, Tobago, V.S. Naipaul, he comes from a family of these indentured Hindu laborers. Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Java, Cambodia, Indonesia, what is today known as Singapore, Sri Lanka. So they would be carted off in shiploads by the British to work in these plantations, mainly plantations, tea and coffee plantations. So Madan Mohan Malviya wanted to introduce a bill to abolish this cruel system of slavery. And of course, Chelmsford, Viceroy, he refused it, and that is when Mohandas Gandhi thought, okay, I'll take this up as a challenge. And then he started his pioneering campaign for abolishing this indentured labor, and he gave a deadline to Chelmsford. He said abolish it on or before 31st July 1917. But the British already, kind of foresaw where this would lead them. So what they said before that date, British government announced that all further recruitment would be immediately stopped. And the reason they gave for it was that this stoppage was part of a special war measure under the Defence of India Act 1917. Remember, the World War I was at its peak. So under the garb of saying that this is a special measure, so we are stopping this, abolishing this indentured labor, and therefore we are nice people. So as a result, the occasion that Gandhi had, the first occasion that Gandhi had for testing out his Satyagraha, failed basically. The British didn't give him that opportunity. Then episode number 2, which is episode opportunity number 2, arose for Gandhi to put this experiment of Satyagraha into practice. That was when he saw the pathetic conditions of farmers in Champaran, Bihar. And for decades, the indigo planters, British indigo planters, remember, indigo was one of the prized commodities for trade, which all the colonial powers during the pre-British era, Dutch, Portuguese, French, British, all these people, indigo was a prized commodity for which entire wars were fought, for a huge slice of that lucrative trade. So once they, conquered India, took over India, they once again, instituted oppressive measures and forced the farmers, poor farmers in Champaran and surrounding regions to, work at subsistence levels, essentially slave labor for, in their indigo plantations. So Gandhi said, okay, this has gone too far. Let me take up this cause. And so he met up with some local leaders out there in Champaran and organized a protest out there. And then, when the British intelligence IB unit heard what he was doing, they gave him a notice. They said, get out of this place or else. So Gandhi said he defied the order. And then the cops arrested him, and he was tried in court on April 18th, 1917. But miraculously, inexplicably rather, the case was withdrawn by the government. Okay. And then Gandhi was back in the field again, and he took up the cause of these indigo farmers, slave labor basically, and gave a string of speeches on how unjust it was and all that. And then the British succumbed to it. Gandhi won his agitation, and this was the first victory of Gandhi's Satyagraha in practice in India. He had won earlier in South Africa, like I mentioned in the previous episode, But this was his first triumph in India. People should remember, okay, and this has nothing to take away from the merit of Gandhi. Okay, it was a good victory. But people should also remember that more than 50 years before Gandhi entered the scene, the same indigo cultivators, the oppressed workers on the farms, they had successfully organized themselves and they had obtained a similar victory in Bengal. I think a beautiful novel has been written on this, this revolt of the indigo cultivators. I forget the name of the novel. It's very touching actually. So in Bengal, a similar victory had been achieved. So this is Gandhi's first victory in Satyagraha. And the next opportunity arose in Ahmedabad, right? Where the Sabarmati is. And out there, a lot of mill workers, they had been agitating for several years for a pay hike, for an increase in salary. But, obviously, Sare Malik to British hi the, joined by some traitorous Indian businessmen as well. I don't mince any words. A lot of these fat cat Indian businessmen are equally as guilty in this operation. Anyway, so the mill workers, they were constantly, they had been carrying on this strike for several years. And then Gandhi came into the scene and he advised them to go on strike. Things like strikes and all were relatively new. And due to Gandhi's, exposure in Europe, basically in England, he had been exposed there. So he thought, this would be a good idea to implement out here. So he advised these workers to go on strike. And then he put a rider that, boss, all of you, please go on strike, but you must not indulge in any violence. And you must make me a solemn pledge to, carry on this strike in a non-violent fashion and still not go back to work until your owners accept your term. Okay. And then, lot of back and forth went on. And finally, the mill owners agreed to refer this issue to arbitration. Okay. And this process, this arbitration went on for 2 weeks. But then the strikers, the workers who were on strike, they lost their zeal. Okay, it takes a lot to sustain these kinds of fight, especially when the means and the money at your disposal are really, very feeble, very paltry. So then when Gandhi saw that, this was weakening, he once again called them for a meeting and he said, look, you have to keep up your spirits. You can't falter like this. And you must continue this strike till those fellows come on the negotiating table for a settlement. Okay. And they kind of somehow agreed. He also put another condition. He said that to intensify your demands, you must take to fasting. Go without food. And this fasting, and the mill workers, they unanimously agreed. And when the owners, the powers that be, when they saw that these guys were really fasting, that this matter had become quite serious, they buckled. And then the laborers and the mill owners sat at the negotiating table and finally a settlement was reached after 21 days of strike. And this was the first victory of Gandhi's idea of going on fast. Okay. So 2 successes. And the next area, the third opportunity where Gandhi carried out his Satyagraha was a campaign at a place called Kheda district in Gujarat, or it's also known as Kaira, Kaira. So out there, the British had obviously imposed another unjust law, something called the land revenue rules. So according to those rules, the farmers, the cultivators, they were entitled to stop paying revenue, land tax, if the yield of the crop for harvest fell below 25% of the productive yield of the land. So this was the rule. I think it was fairly just. But then, in practice, the government officials denied even this concession. Even when the yield fell below 25%, they continued to extort money. The British, being the colonial oppressors, they didn't care a damn for whatever their prayers and their begging. So they continued their high-handedness, and that is when Gandhi entered the scene, and he told the farmers, "This jao aap log satyagraha pe baitho." And he also told them that take a solemn oath, vow, not to pay any revenue at all. Not only that, be non-violent and suffer all the consequences, which included confiscating their land. You must suffer that. He told these cultivators, let the British confiscate all your immovable and movable assets. And that was when Gandhi, in Kheda, that was when Gandhi was joined by many eminent public people of high stature and dignity and respect, the foremost of whom was a man named Vallabhbhai Patel. At that time, Vallabhbhai Patel was born as the son of a very humble and poor farmer who rose to become a very successful lawyer and advocate. And when he entered this Kheda agitation, he had a flourishing and a rather wealthy law practice. So that is when Patel ji entered the thing, and the cultivators went on this strike, and nothing could bend them. No amount of oppression could bend them, and their whole of a deep-seated fear of officialdom, babudom. That is what prevented them from taking any active steps like the one they did now under Gandhi's guidance. So the first thing that Gandhi's inspiration did was to crush this fear, was to uproot this fear of officialdom from their hearts. So they stood resolute, they stood firm, and all kinds of coercion, threat, intimidation, nothing worked. And when the officials resorted to the last step of forfeiting their lands, they said, you take it away, but we will not budge. And finally the government conceded, and they said, "Theek hai, we'll go by the rule book, and you can have your lands back." So this is two great victories of Gandhi's Satyagraha. So Ahmedabad and Kheda. So all these three, if you exclude Champaran or if you include Champaran, these three major campaigns of Satyagraha, they put Gandhi in the limelight. But in reality, as far as Gandhi was concerned, all these agitations were merely experiments. There is a famous saying that learning on the job. There are two ways. You go through the grind, the formal training in theory, and then slowly learn by practice. Then you get a degree. So there is a proper step-by-step process by which you educate, you gain this education, and then you get into a job, as an intern, apprentice, whatever, and then you become a proper professional. So this is a regular, accepted, tried and tested route. The other thing is you pick up bits and from here and there through experience, process it in your brain, and say that I'm also a professional, and these are my methods. So you start learning on the job. So this was Gandhi's method. Yeah.
So would it be accurate to say that he had in it him to convince these people of these measures, to fast, to give up property? That means there was a significant leadership trait in him where he was able to hold sway over.
Absolutely. See, you must not forget why people listened to him. He had a reputation, that followed him all the way from South Africa. Plus, he was, in close association with people like Gopal Krishna Gokhale. All these things gave him credibility and some kind of stature. Okay. And of course, he had his own brand of leadership style, which we'll examine, as we go on. So all these campaigns, they were experiments, learning on the job, like I said, in arousing mass action. How to organize the masses in the most effective way and lead them, become their sole leader, where your word is the Veda. So these were experiments as far as Gandhi was concerned. But they were also very, very significant in the sense that they brought two very, very different men of entirely different temperaments, opposite temperaments, into Gandhi's close circle eventually. The first, like I said, was Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. The second was the son of a fabulously wealthy lawyer from Allahabad named Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru.
Okay.
So Nehru, he was first impressed by Gandhi when he saw what Gandhi had done in Champaran. Okay, and Michael Edwardes, in his biography of Nawab Nehru, this is what he says, and I quote: Champaran, which displayed Gandhi as a man of action, came to Jawaharlal Nehru as a revelation and prepared the way for his commitment not only to the nationalist cause but also to Gandhi. So two commitments at the same time Nehru had. One, to the nation, to the freedom struggle. Two, personal commitment to Mohandas Gandhi. We will look at these things in great detail in the future episodes. Alright. Now, the next major stage in Gandhi's Satyagraha experiment came during the nationwide agitation against the Rowlatt Act or the Rowlatt Bills. Just to give a preface to how all this started, I'll read out a small quote from R.C. Majumdar. Quote, look at the care with which Majumdar chooses his words. Quote, in spite of his loyalty to the British and a strong dislike to embarrass the British governments by pressing the demands for home rule during the First World War, Gandhi made it clear to the Viceroy, as indeed his activities at Kheda and Champaran clearly showed, that he would not tolerate the tyranny and the wrongdoing of the officials. Okay? So, close quote. This much is there. So, the point we need to underscore here is that what I mentioned in the previous episode was the loyalty of Mohandas Gandhi to the British government. We have to keep this in mind. Okay? And next, what Majumdar says is that, and I quote, true to his principle, Gandhi had no hesitation in deciding to offer Satyagraha if the bills to give effect to the recommendations of the Rowlatt Committee were passed into law. In spite of his earnest pleading with the Viceroy, one of the two bills was passed on 18th March 1919. Okay, close quote. So we have to keep this background in mind before we look at all the consequences that followed. So the Rowlatt Act, to summarize, was basically an imposition of a quasi-martial law even in peacetime, largely in Punjab. Okay, remember the timeline. 1919. World War I had just ended in 1918. So the British had absolutely no justification, moral or legal or any other standpoint. They had no justification to pass basically a legislation or sanctioning oppression. Still, like Majumdar mentions, they went ahead and passed one aspect of this deadly act in peacetime. And why did they do? Because the British were spooked. Like I said, the World War I had ended the previous year, 1918, as a result of which a large contingent of Indian soldiers who had been recruited for World War I and who had returned back home from Europe were armed. They were soldiers. So British had supplied them with guns and ammunition and things like that. So the British were spooked. that these people, and then all this Gandhi thing and freedom movement was going on throughout the country. So the British were really scared. What if these guys took the plunged into the freedom struggle, and they instigated a mass nationwide armed revolt? So this was the reason behind passing this so-called Rowlatt Act.
Remarkable that the British foresaw this
If you-
and nipped it.
Look, if you have to run this kind of an empire, as horrible or as heartless as it might sound to people, it is practical. If you have to run an empire like that, of that global spread, forget the morality, ethics, but if you have to run it, you have to run it through a combination of insecurity, fear, and ruthless suppression. I'll tell you one small, it might be a digression. The lengths to which the British went. If they perceived even a fissure, even a slight tremble that they perceived would be a threat to the British, was somewhere in Leh Ladakh in those times, in the late 1900s, in the late 19th century, 1891 or 92. So, one Afghan Pathan, so he had murdered a British military guy, businessman come military officer in that region, in Leh Ladakh region, over some squabble over money and things like that. The entire might of the government was invested into this cause, and the Brits did not give up. They launched a massive manhunt to catch this man. He was finally apprehended and caught in Samarkand and executed summarily. For 3 years, they hunted down one man. What was it? A skirmish which resulted in the murder of an English officer. And he was not a great high-ranking officer like a governor or a military general or anything like that. He was a station officer in today's parlance.
So again, like you said, remarkable the lengths to which they
Yes.
Defiance of authority had to be quelled.
Had to be quelled, ruthlessly quelled. It didn't matter how long that process took. The end had to be reached. So this was the mindset that went behind all these legislations like Rowlatt Act and things like that. So when the Viceroy refused, Gandhi said, okay, I'm launching a campaign against this. As a preparatory step of that campaign, he called a small meeting, a conference of sorts, and that was attended by about 20 or 25 people, including Sardar Patel and Sarojini Naidu. So one of the first resolutions of that meeting was to draft a Satyagraha pledge. And this was finalized, the draft was finalized and passed as a resolution by all the people. And the date on which this pledge was taken was 24th February 1919. Okay. The refusal of the Viceroy came just 6 days before, 18th March. This is how the pledge read. Being conscientiously of opinion that the bills known as the Indian Criminal Law Amendment Bill number 1 of 1919 and the Criminal Law Emergency Powers Bill number 2 of 1919 together plus another bill, this is constituted the Rowlatt Act. Okay, these bills are unjust, subversive of the principles of liberty and justice, and destructive of the elementary rights of individuals on which the safety of the community as a whole and the state itself is based. We solemnly affirm that in the event of these bills becoming law and until they are withdrawn, we shall refuse civilly to obey these laws and other such laws as a committee to be hereinafter appointed may think fit, and we further affirm that in this struggle we will faithfully follow truth and refrain from violence to life, person or property. This is a full text of the pledge. And after this, Gandhi established a new body which was called Satyagraha Sabha. Gandhi was its president, no surprise there, and its HQ was in Bombay. And then, frenzied activity followed. Lots of pamphlets, bulletins were issued to public. Public meetings were held in various places, and a mass movement was built up. A lot of people, thousands, if not lakhs of people, signed this pledge of Satyagraha. Common people signed, and then Gandhi started another tactic of mass agitations. Gandhi started for the first time. It was known as the First General Hartal, 1919. So he gave a clarion call to the masses. He said, all of you should suspend your activities, your jobs, your business for one full day. And throughout that day, you should observe fasting and you should indulge yourself in prayer. Okay. This would be a preparatory, purificatory ritual before you, plunge yourself into the formal Satyagraha. Okay, this was how it is. I'm going into this detail because without this background, it is very hard to understand the consequences of Satyagraha or the kind of halo which was attached to it over the years. Okay, both the cause and the consequence have to be examined, and without this detailing,
context here.
Without this proper historical context, all you will have is superficial things that उसने सत्याग्रह किया, उसकी वजह से हमको आज़ादी आ गई. This kind of thing will keep going on. Okay, you have to have a critical, objective, truthful analysis. These are all facts which I am reading out. So the self-purification, a date was fixed, and another stalwart of that person joined this movement, this fledgling movement. His name was C. Rajagopalachari. So they fixed a date. They gave out appeal in which they fixed a date for this Satyagraha. It was 30th March 1919. And then, they reviewed the date and they postponed it slightly. They said, okay, not 30th March, but 6th April. That appeal met with an overwhelming response throughout India. Okay. And the Hartal began exactly in Delhi on 30th March, the original date, because, transport communication was not as instant as it is today. It really took a few days, for one message to reach throughout the country. So instead of 6th April, people in Delhi, they thought, okay, the program is on 30th April. So let's do the Hartal on 30th April. But anyway, it was a great success. And obviously the cops were not very happy with what was happening. So they, put several obstacles in this Satyagraha procession. They opened fire and wounded a lot of people. And this went on not just in Delhi, but in Lahore, Amritsar, most of these big cities in north and northwestern India. Remember, undivided Bharatavarsha. Okay. So, because the Delhi thing was so successful, Gandhi received a lot of invitations, like a flood. There's a deluge of demand, huge demand for Gandhi, his presence. So, offering, inviting him to visit all these cities, Lahore, Delhi, Amritsar, all these places. So, this is what Majumdar writes about that. Thus, the Hartal of 6th April 1919 marked out Gandhi as an all-India leader. Okay. You see, he's out of the servants of India society. He was not invited there. He's not even so popular or prominent within the Congress. Despite, both of them, he began to carve out his own independent brand of leadership, which would be irresistible. Extraordinary strategist. Okay. Now, there's no more moderates and extremists. You see where this is all leading to,
okay.
Parag?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is what I mean. R.C. Majumdar writes. I'll read it out again. Quote, thus the Hartal of 6th April 1919 marked out Gandhi as the All India leader. The blood of the martyrs soon consecrated him as the uncrowned king of India. Close quote. All right. After this, a great, in fact, a turning point, a very momentous episode occurred in the same year, 1919, which put a huge test to Gandhi's newfound emergent political leadership. This was the genocide, the heartless, ruthless bloodbath of innocent Indians committed by General Dyer at Jallianwala Bagh in April 1919. Jallianwala Bagh genocide was the first major test of Gandhi's Satyagraha method, the way he took political decisions at key junctures in the freedom struggle is very, very important from multiple perspectives, which will become clear as I go on. So let's get back to the Hartal, which was originally planned for March 30th, 1919, but which became a reality in Bombay on April 6th, the date it was postponed. So on that day, April 6th, 1919, the Hartal was carried out on the streets of Bombay, and it was hugely successful. All the people joined as one in that Hartal movement. I'll give a couple of instances of how the Hartal was actually carried out on the ground. Gandhi was himself physically present in Bombay on that day, and in the morning, thousands and thousands of Bombayites, they took a bath in the sea at Chowpatty, and then they marched in an organized manner in a procession all the way till a place called Thakurdwar. Okay, all these are familiar localities to most people, in Bombay. And Muslims also took part in that procession in quite large numbers, and they also joined forces in this movement, and they took some of the Hindu leaders in that procession to a nearby mosque, and that was where Sarojini Naidu and Gandhi were already present. And from the in the precincts of that mosque, both Gandhi and Sarojini Naidu, they delivered speeches. And there, it was suggested, in that speech, it was suggested that people should take pledges of Satyagraha, Swadeshi, and they should take a solemn oath of adhering to Hindu-Muslim unity right on the spot. Sarojini Naidu made this appeal, but surprisingly, Gandhi rejected her proposal right then and there. The reason he gave for it was that this kind of momentous pledges should be taken only after due deliberation and not in haste. And then he delivered one punchline, and he said that all those people, Hindus and Muslims, who wanted to take this pledge of Hindu-Muslim unity should assemble at the same spot the next day in the morning. And the next day, Gandhi, Sarojini Naidu, other people of the Congress were there, and as Gandhi had predicted, only a few people had turned out to take this pledge, compared to the massive crowd of 50,000 or so, which had assembled there the previous day, April 6th. Anyway, this is what R.C. Majumdar says about how he sums up the whole thing. He says that a low turnout for Hindu-Muslim unity thing indicated a great drawback in popular movements in India. And the drawbacks were initial enthusiasm for doing exciting work, for doing inspired work, but indifference, if not dislike, for sustained and constructive efforts. Even today, this is the case. Another characteristic feature of the Bombay Hartal was the beginning of the civil disobedience by the sale of 2 proscribed or banned books written by Gandhi. Because they were banned, they sold like hotcakes. Okay, so much for this Hartal. If this was a success in Bombay on April 6th, it was not so smooth in Delhi, on March 30th. So this is very important, very, very important, because it directly leads to Jallianwala Bagh. Okay, and out there on March 30th, there were clashes between the British police and the people, the agitators, and military was called. They fired into the crowd, killed a large people and wounded even a larger number of people throughout north and northwestern India, large parts of large cities in Pakistan today. At that point, a very great man jumped headlong into this Hartal or civil disobedience movement on March 30th, 1919. The name of his great man was Swami Shraddhananda. So Majumdar pays him the highest tribute. He says, and I quote, Swami Shraddhananda, a man of irreproachable character and held in the highest esteem all over India. Okay. What he did was that he submitted a written statement about the police operation, the military operation in Delhi during that March 30th episode, and I will read out directly from Shraddhananda. The 30th of March should be observed as a day of mourning. All business and shops should be closed, and one should spend the day in wishing well for the country, in reforming his own mind, and in philanthropic work. Every man, woman and child should attend the meeting at 5 o'clock. So this is what he said. And what happened on that day was at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, as people were getting ready to attend the 5 o'clock meeting, the cops caught wind of this news, and as the shops were being shut at the railway station, one European railway official, he threatened the shopkeepers and the activists. He said, don't do this, or you'll have to face a lot of serious consequences. But people told the official, said, mind your own business. This is a struggle for freedom movement. We hold Swami Shraddhananda in great respect, and he said, get lost. And then that guy obviously is angry. He called the cops, and the cops came in. Not just the cops, they brought soldiers with machine guns. Okay, these things are very important, Parag. The
Yes.
kind of sacrifices that not 1 or 2 or 10 or 1,000 people have made throughout India, but lakhs and lakhs of them. Okay, so soldiers with machine guns, they came, and this is what when Shraddhananda heard that this was happening, he said, as soon as this report was conveyed to me by some gentlemen who had come running from the railway station, I proceeded there and heard that the machine gun had fired indiscriminately, and about a dozen had either been killed or wounded, and the bodies were being dragged into the railway station yard. He continues, I addressed a public meeting which was attended by 50,000 people and asked the huge audience to follow me and disperse quietly to their homes. When we approached the clock tower, we found that the Gurkhas in the middle of the road in double file, so they are assembled on either side of the street. On seeing us, they moved to the right footboard, but as soon as we came near them, a rifle was fired into the crowd. There was great commotion, but I pacified the men and went alone to the Gurkhas and asked them why they were firing on innocent people. They pointed 2 rifles at me and said, "Tumko ched denge. We will pierce you." I was clad in my sannyasi dress. Remember, he was a Swamiji. I was clad in my sannyasi dress and standing quietly before them and said, मैं यहाँ खड़ा हूँ, मुझे गोली मारो. And at once, 8 or 10 more rifles were aimed at my heart and insolent threats continued to be made. The crowd was about to rush saying, let us die and not you. These are the people who got this freedom, Parag.
Stirring.
Okay. I stopped them by waving my hand and reminding them of their vow. After I stood there for about 3 minutes with the rifles pointed at my breast, a European officer came and asked the policeman present there whether he had ordered the firing. I then left the place with the people following. Isko bolte hai guts.
Stirring. This part where machine guns, armed soldiers were brought in by this angry European, and actually was fired and a dozen or so people were killed. In your vast reading, has it been captured anywhere? It is
all these are documented. In Swami Shraddhananda's biography, it's documented. R.C. Majumdar's book, it's documented. History of Freedom Struggle, it is documented. The point is, despite all such documentary evidences, real facts, truths, eyewitness accounts, the official reports of Britishers themselves, despite all this mass of information available, it was all brushed under the carpet by the Nehruvian history establishment.
Understood.
Simple. Straightforward answer.
Criminal.
That's all. Anyway, so, you know what happened after this? When, Shraddhanand, it takes a lot of courage to do this. You know what happened after this? The dead bodies, let's hear it from Swamiji himself. The dead bodies and the wounded were removed, meaning they were moved to the police hospital. You know what happened there? The British nurses refused to treat them. If that was not enough, they not only refused, they told them to their faces that, look, you deserve this.
Nurses said this.
You deserve this fate. You are wretched rebels and we will not attend you. Talk a big thing about, who's that? Florence of Nightingale, Red Cross, selfless Christian nurses, hospices, orphanages, great gifts of British to India. This is the face. This is the face. The same Shraddhananda was brutally stabbed to death by a member of the peaceful community. Because among other things, Swami Shraddhananda was, for decades, he was involved in highly successful Ghar Wapsi campaigns. And at the instigation of one of the Islamic clergy, one fanatic, I forget his name, I'll put it, once the recording is complete, I'll put it on the channel, in the video. So one of the fanatics, he entered Swami Shraddhananda when he was unarmed and defenseless and lying on his bed. He stabbed him brutally to death. And when he was tried in the court, Gandhi said, we must forgive this poor misguided fanatic. Remember, Shraddhananda had responded to Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's call for this hartal.
To lend him strength, and this is how.
In death, Gandhi did dishonor to Swami Shraddhananda. Lots of these facts will emerge. Okay, this is going to be a long, detailed series. I don't care. I really don't mind if it gets even 10 views, if these videos. The truth has to be out there.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, this is completely in the spirit of national service. Nothing else. These things have to come out. A lot of people who have actually shed their blood and had their throats slit and their heads split open, they gave us freedom. Their stories, if we don't, if they are not brought into light, I will treat myself as a criminal. These things should be put out in the public domain. Coming back to April 6th, 1919, Delhi observed another parallel hartal, which was attended by more than 10,000 people who were assembled in a public space, and a lot of parallel meetings were happening. And Majumdar says that popular excitement ran very high both in Delhi and Amritsar. So the local leaders invited Gandhi to visit both Delhi, Amritsar, all those places. Gandhi said, okay, fine, I'll come. Because see, these meetings were inspired directly by a call given by Gandhi. He had roused the masses, okay, but he didn't know how to deal with the consequences. I'll narrate a couple of those incidents in this episode. So Gandhi said he agreed, okay, fine, you're calling me to these places, I will surely come. And he boarded the train on April 7th and for Delhi. And when the train reached the railway station at Palwal, which is about 40 miles from Delhi, the cops stopped it, and they gave him a written order prohibiting him from entering Punjab. So Gandhi was to go first to Amritsar and then come to Delhi. So they said, you can't enter Punjab. All right. And Gandhi was, politely asked to step down, and he refused to step down from the train. So he was physically carried by the police and put on a train back to Bombay under police escort. Gandhi reached, Bombay. The moment he reached Bombay, police freed him. But they also told him the news that, his arrest had roused the people throughout North India. How dare you do this? And there's a place called Paidhoni in Bombay.
Yes.
There was a huge tense atmosphere out there. So Gandhi went there to pacify the crowds. And, he was received with open arms, taken out in a huge procession, and mounted police were called in, meaning policemen on horseback. Yeah. They were called in, to prevent any violent outbreak or incident. And anyway, some violence did happen, and the cops were ordered by the seniors to disperse the crowd. Some people got trampled under the foot of the horse. Other people's throat was literally crushed under the hoof of the horse. Imagine that.
Nameless, unsung heroes.
Unsung heroes. So, with the news of Gandhi's arrest, and deportation back to Bombay, a lot of violence also broke out at Ahmedabad, and a lot of, general commotion. Mill workers, remember, whom Gandhi had gotten justice. They obviously had a lot of gratitude for Gandhi. So they were also angry, and, they went on a massive rampage, arson, incendiarism, violence, all these things. They killed one police sergeant, and, martial law. Ahmedabad was put under martial law. So when Gandhi heard these news and, saw some of this violence with his own eyes, he was horrified. This apostle of non-violence, his call of non-violence, so which brings us to another point about his effectiveness of his non-violence, which we'll discuss in a future episode. So Gandhi went to Ahmedabad. Then he learned, he saw the aftermath of the violence and arson. Railway tracks were pulled out by the crowd. So finally he thought, look, this is not a non-violence and Satyagraha that I had in mind. So on 13th April 1919, Gandhi called for a public meeting, and he basically scolded the people out there that, what you have done is wrong. And he said, this is classic Jesus Christ syndrome. In the meeting he said, I will go on a penitential fast, meaning self-punishment, penitential fast for 3 days to atone for your sins. This is Jesus, no? Jesus died for you.
Clever.
Okay, and he appealed the people to go on a similar fast. Okay, for 1 day. And then not only that, look, he says all these in public meetings. Okay, not only that, he also told the people who had assembled there, basically who had committed violent actions, to publicly confess their guilt to the government.
To the government?
Yeah, to the government. And ask their forgiveness and condonement. But, this is what Majumdar says, but there was no response from that side.
So there was no response.
So, I'll just read out a small excerpt from his speech, okay, that he delivered in Ahmedabad on 14th April 1919. Quote Gandhi: I have said number of times that Satyagraha admits of no violence, no pillage, no incendiarism, and still, in the name of Satyagraha, we burnt down buildings, forcibly captured weapons, extorted money, stopped trains, cut off telegraph wires, killed innocent people, plundered shops and private houses. If deeds such as these could save me from the prison house or the scaffold, I should not like to be saved. Close quote. People didn't know the kind of leadership that had hit them. How do you respond to something like this, Parag?
He's making the victims look like the culprits.
See? And they are fighting against whom? All this arson, all this. Good or bad is different. But a revolt is a revolt. It's part of the freedom struggle. Who are they fighting? When you use the word plunder, arson and all that, when Gandhi uses these words, against whom?
Fellow citizens.
Against the greatest empire of plunder in the history of mankind.
Irony is too...
They can't, it's very hard to decide justice, but this is how you should approach these things. So what happened next is that after this speech, Gandhi thought that, I have committed a great error when I, gave a call to launch non-violent passive resistance or civil disobedience or Satyagraha. And he thought that even if the laws were patently unjust, and all laws of the British were unjust, it was an empire of plunder and oppression. They didn't have the, goodness of the welfare of the Indian people in their heart. All their laws were unjust. So Gandhi thought that as a Satyagrahi, even if the laws were unjust, people should scrupulously obey them. Okay. And and I quote, for only then does the right accrue to the Satyagrahi of the civil disobedience of certain laws in well-defined circumstances. Okay. No one had the right to adopt Satyagraha before he had thoroughly qualified himself for it, and Gandhi realized that his error lay in his failure to observe this necessary limitation. Okay, so Gandhi writes about these, self-introspection, and he says that he admits to himself that he was guilty of a Himalayan miscalculation by calling for this Satyagraha. Now, so what was the lesson learnt and what was the next step of action? So this is what Majumdar writes. He says, in his own words, Gandhi suspended the civil disobedience and decided not to restart it on a mass scale without creating a band of well-trained, well-tried, pure-hearted volunteers who thoroughly understood the strict conditions of Satyagraha and could explain them to the people, and by sleepless vigilance keep them on the right path. Accordingly, he went to Bombay and raised a corps of Satyagrahi volunteers through the Satyagraha Sabha. Remember? But Gandhi found that people took little interest in the peaceful side of Satyagraha. The number of volunteers dwindled, and even those who remained did not take a regular training. Close quote. In other words, this was a monumental flop. And what are we told repeatedly? Satyagraha only brought us freedom. Yeah? Anyway. So let's go back to Punjab now. Okay. Lahore was part of Punjab. Lahore, Amritsar, Jalandhar, all these cities were parts of Punjab. Punjab was still, on the edge, so to speak. And the Rowlatt, one of the provisions of Rowlatt Bill were already in force out there. And a man named O. Dwyer, Dwyer. So he was a governor of Punjab back then. And he carried out this martial law with extraordinary brutality. For no reason, people were carried off and put in jail. One of the provisions of this horrible martial law was that arbitrary arrest was sanctioned, illegal detention, police detention was sanctioned, and people had no recourse to trial. Meaning you don't have any freedom or any rights. So this Michael O. Dwyer imposed these things ruthlessly, and there were regular disturbances and throughout Punjab, and 3 cities were constantly in a state of boil. So the first was Lahore, then Gujranwala and Kasur, and last but not the least Amritsar. So I'll leave out details, but it was really horrible. And these things peaked in Amritsar. When, the last straw was when, a crowd of people were taking the dead bodies for funeral. These people were killed by police action. So these people were carrying, their supporters, their family, guys, well-wishers, they were peacefully carrying these dead bodies so they could perform the funeral rites. Yeah. Okay. And when they came on a bridge in Amritsar, the cops needlessly fired on them. That resulted in more dead bodies, and then all hell broke loose, which is when the British administration brought in a monster named Brigadier General Dyer on April 11th, 1919. So 2 days later, he was a complete monster. 2 days later, Jallianwala Bagh happened. I'll just read out the brutality, just one small paragraph written by an eyewitness British person. Okay, it is a very vivid eyewitness account, like I said, given by a lady named Valentine Chirol. She was present at the spot, and Majumdar calls her as she was by no means a friend of India. This is what she writes, and I quote: "One cannot possibly realize the frightfulness of it until one has actually looked upon the Jallianwala Bagh, which means seen the physical environment out there. Once a garden, but in modern times a waste space frequently used for fairs and public meetings, about the size of Trafalgar Square and closed in almost entirely by walls above, which rise on the backs of native houses facing into the congested streets of the city. I entered by the same narrow lane by which General Dyer entered with about 50 rifles. I stood on the same rising ground on which he stood when, without a word of warning, he opened fire at about 100 yards range upon a dense crowd collected mainly in the lower and more distant part of the enclosure around a platform from which speeches were being delivered. The crowd was estimated by him at 6,000, by others at 10,000 or more, but practically unarmed and all quite defenseless. The panic-stricken multitude broke at once, but for 10 consecutive minutes, he kept up a merciless fusillade, in all 1,500 rounds, on that seething mass of humanity caught like rats in a trap, vainly rushing for the few narrow exits or lying flat on the ground to escape the rain of bullets which he personally directed to the points where the crowd was the thickest. The targets, to use his own word, were good. And then at the end of those 10 minutes, having exhausted his ammunition, he marched his men off by the way they came. He had killed, according to official figures, 379 and left about 1,200 wounded on the ground, for whom, again, to use his own words, he did not consider it his job to take the slightest thought. And 2 days later, on 15th April 1919, actual martial law was declared, imposed on Punjab, whole of Punjab. What happened? One of the horrific things of this martial law was that the military went on a rampage just for the fun of it, okay? So under martial law, there was one scoundrel, a completely heartless monster named Captain Devton. He was stationed in Kasur. This man would take flights, airborne. He would drop bombs in the Punjab countryside just for fun, razing entire villages to the ground.
Devton.
Devton. These people, later the British government, felicitated them. This was the case. And then public floggings were routine, beatings were routine. People would be innocent people, man. They would be put in metallic cages, stripped completely naked, covered in lime, which you use for, walls. Covered in lime in the hot April weather in Amritsar, Punjab basically. You know the kind of heat out there, exposed to the sun from morning till evening. People would just die of sunstroke. They took great pleasure in doing this. And, floggings, beatings, and they would, just for the fun of it, they would enter homes of innocent citizens at night. And if, people were caught in, husband and wife, they were caught in an intimate, situation, all kinds of filthy abuses would be targeted at the lady, poor lady. Remember, it was a very, very conservative India. Okay, and then if women were perchance walking alone in the streets, British cops or, military soldiers, they would apprehend her just for the fun of it. You go home, I know where you live. You go home, my men will follow you and they will examine what is there under your skirts, just for the fun of it. These are all documented out here. So, and last but not the least, there was a very, very interesting measure. Another interesting measure that was imposed during this martial law, again done by General Dyer. What he did was to cut off water supply and electricity supply to the entire city of Punjab after his genocide. He had the excuse of martial law, no? After that, and guess who applied the same tactic after India attained independence? Cutting off power supply and water supply. The great Srimati Deshki Neta Durga Ma Indira Gandhi, Srimati Indira Gandhi, one of the first things she did as soon as she imposed emergency was to cut off power supply and water supply to all newspapers who didn't toe her line. See where the inspiration comes from. Come back to Jallianwala Bagh. It was obviously a act of unparalleled brutality, savagery, and apart from a handful of people in the British administration, both in India and in England, apart from a handful of people, nobody held General Dyer guilty. On the contrary, they feted him. So what is interesting is the future of General Dyer in the aftermath of his cold-blooded genocide massacre of innocent Indians at Jallianwala Bagh. The whole of European and English society in India, they regarded General Dyer as a savior of the British Empire. Not only that, the topmost echelons of the British government, they passed something called an Indemnity Act. Look at the wording. An Indemnity Act to shield all the misdeeds in India committed by officials of any rank in India. So that Indemnity Act was the excuse. It was rather the wheel to protect General Dyer. Remember what I spoke about, the lengths to which they went to, preserve their empire. intact. Anyway, so there's something called the European Association. It stood in favor, it stood in support of General Dyer. Because the outrage was so widespread, he was removed from his post. So the same European Association and other European bodies, British social associations, they stood as a united voice and they said, you must reinstate General Dyer. Okay? Then they also issued a public appeal in various newspapers to support a fundraising activity for General Dyer.
Fundraising for what?
Fundraising to secure his future. Okay? Then they organized a memorial conference for General Dyer, meaning, in his honor. Not only that, a huge fundraising campaign was started in India by British women. They called it, the name of the fund? Dyer Appreciation Fund. Okay, it was held in Missouri. This fund was located in Missouri. And out there, the fundraising was stupendous actually. They managed to raise about 20,000 British pounds. And in a grand ceremony, some of those fashionable ladies presented that amount to General Dyer. Along with it, they presented him a sword. And a certain Colonel Johnson present in that function. Okay, he invited General Dyer to Europe and held another great gala dinner in his honor. And there, this Colonel Johnson applauded him as a protector of the poor. And the climax comes in the form of Viceroy of India, Chelmsford. This man did not take any kind of action against him, even after the full facts were put on his table, and he knew it. And after that, something called a Hunter Committee was appointed to, investigate the extent of the crimes committed not only by General Dyer, but, under this Rowlatt Act and the general reign of terror martial law in Punjab. So this Hunter Committee began its investigation. The moment it began its investigation, that is when the British government passed the Act of Indemnity, which I mentioned. All right. So now we come to the findings of this committee, Hunter Committee. In a parallel development, the Hunter Committee was comprised entirely of British officials. The Congress and other nationalist bodies said, no, nothing doing. You have to put one of us or several of us in this committee. The British refused. So they said, okay, we'll form our own separate parallel committee. And these people toured. So something called a subcommittee was formed. And then Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya, he submitted his own report and put out a list of 92 questions for which the British obviously had zero answers. And this subcommittee, like I mentioned, which the Congress formed, its members included Mohandas Gandhi, Motilal Nehru, Chittaranjan Das, Fazl ul Haq, and Abbas Tyabji, and a man named, very influential congressman named M.R. Jaikar. So long story short, the British and this Congress subcommittee, they submitted their own reports on 26th May 1920. Both reports obviously differed. British would do anything to cover up their crimes. The Congress would do anything to unearth them. So they submitted their own independent reports, and it obviously differed, like I said, but both reports fully agreed on a couple of points in with respect to the atrocities in Punjab. And I'll just read that out. The Satyagraha movement was mainly responsible for the outbreak. Both committees agreed on this. The Satyagraha movement was mainly responsible for the outbreak. Number 2, very eye-opening. The police and the military were justified in firing upon the mob. It doesn't stop there. As regards Jallianwala Bagh, the reports held that General Dyer's conduct was open to criticism on two respects. First, that he fired without warning, and second, that he continued firing for too long. They thought that General Dyer had committed a grave error of judgment, but he could not be blamed for not attending to the wounded because no one was exposed to unnecessary suffering, it seems. The last common element in both the report submitted by the British and the Congress subcommittee. The last point, this is rather thrilling. Both these reports agreed and exonerated the government of India from all blame. And now for the climax. What was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi's response to this? Remember, he was also part of the subcommittee. What was his future plan of action? What was his ultimate response to this Jallianwala Bagh and the repression in Punjab? I will read out directly from R.C. Majumdar. Quote, for the time being, Gandhi's action appeared to be mysterious. He suspended the Satyagraha movement on April 18 in view of the mob violence. On July 21st, 1919, this is July 21st, remember, 2 full months after the report. On July 21st, 1919, he issued a statement in which he said that on account of indications of goodwill on the part of the British government, he would not resume civil disobedience as it was not his purpose to embarrass the government. He called on the Satyagrahis to work for a constructive program, namely the use of indigenous or Swadeshi goods and unity between Hindus and Muslims. Close quote. On that note, we can conclude today's episode.
It's difficult to say anything at this point in time because the narrative laced with facts, quoting primary sources that Sandeep always does, was gut-wrenching. So many unsung heroes, those who were trampled by horses in Paidoni, Depton who threw bombs for fun over Punjab, and many other such aspects that Sandeep brought out, I'm sure, like me, would leave the audience somber and sad at how all these events transpired. The climax that Sandeep quoted need not be repeated. I think it is a telling revelation on the character and the insights into how the mind of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi worked at that point in time. So we'll stop here for this episode. Thank you so much, Sandeep. As usual, bringing out so many crucial aspects to light of the freedom struggle in this ongoing series. So we look forward to this conversation continuing in the next episode. Thank you all in the audience for joining us on Dharma Podcast and listening to the erudite Sandeep Balakrishna. We hope it was informative, stirring, and useful. And please like, share, subscribe, and give us your super thanks for this episode and for Dharma Podcast so that the knowledge of Sandeep Balakrishna reaches a wider audience. Thank you again.